All right, designer perspective number 3. I don't have time to learn how to be a PM and do all these things and get all this information that you've had. I have to polish my craft. I've heard this before quite a bit, and it's in this context. I don't have time to learn how to code. I have to polish my craft. Now, I'm not going to go and beat the dead horse of whether or not designers should code. Should or shouldn't, there's tons of perspectives that are out there. What I will say is this. The barriers to other disciplines are lowering today. And so eventually, designers should code. It may not be true today. It may not be true tomorrow. But what about a year from now? What about 5 years from now? When things such as Cursor or Figma Make or all these other vibe coding apps lower the barrier to these things. Because really, AI is lowering the barriers, not just to code, but to all disciplines that are out there. And so I want you to think not whether or not coding or PMing will help your craft, because objectively it will. The question is it worth the time investment trade-off? And in that sense, that cost-benefit analysis is changing daily. So revisit those assumptions that you once had. This future implication of this is that eventually everyone is going to be a designer, everyone is going to be a developer, everyone is going to be a PM. We're all going to have access to these tools and these tips and tricks and information at our hands that we never used to. And so it brings this question of, well, what does a designer mean in 2030? Or what does a developer mean in 2030? And these are great questions, but the reality is that there's going to be a shift that is going to happen. So I would say just embrace that shift. Be willing to change. Be willing to adapt into it. Because really embracing these cross-functional fears over the long term is going to lead to reduced fear, greater experimentation, and better collaboration with your peers. So dive in. Now you may be saying, well, pixels are where I'm comfortable. And that is totally fair. But what I will say against that is that oftentimes being uncomfortable is a signal that you are growing. There's this great quote from one of my favorite characters, which is Jake the dog. It says, sucking at something is the first step towards being sort of good at something. And I kind of love that. There's something so poetic and great about that. It is okay to start on something and absolutely suck on it, because you'll be better the day after, and the day after that, and the day after that. So going back to this designer perspective of I don't have time to learn how to do blank, I have to polish my craft, what I would say from the product perspective here is breadth can inform that depth, especially when you're feeling stuck. So start playing now. Go explore. Go look at these new things and these new opportunities and bring it into the work you're doing today. Because these roles are going to blur. We're all going to be makers eventually. The last perspective I want to give you is this one, which is if I work 2x the hours, I will 2x my impact. I think a lot of people right now are feeling pressured on this one. We're seeing a lot of 996 hit the industry right now. For those that aren't aware, this means 9 to 9, 6 days a week, 72-hour weeks. And we actually have data showing this is true. Ramp, a company in San Francisco, they process payments and look for expenses, and what they are seeing is that more and more people are working on Saturdays. I think this stems from a naive perspective, which is that, really, oftentimes we also have this naive perspective, which is that an improvement in efficiency via things like AI means that we can work less. That is the optimist perspective on this. But really the reality is that product leaders are thinking this. An improvement in efficiency means the competition can get ahead faster. And so people are starting to panic. And this is really the dark side of Jevons paradox. Jevons paradox, if you aren't aware, basically says that as the cost of something decreases by half or more, oftentimes the demand increases by more than half, so the net demand actually goes up, not down. And this is because business leaders are just like, haha, let's do it. Go, push these people forward, faster, 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 we must go. And the reason for this is if you look at the equations and do some bad math, it really makes sense. If you look at a normal week that has 40 hours, under 9 and 6, you can have 72 hours. That's a 32-hour delta. But now, if you have AI improving your efficiency by 2x, that normal week is now 80 hours, but that delta is now 64. And suddenly, it's looking more and more appealing to work harder and do these longer shifts, especially when you're comparing it to a normal week. Because suddenly you have a 104-hour delta in a week with that increased efficiency. And so I think some product leaders today are thinking, oh, with AI and 996, 1 year of work will be equivalent to 2.6. And what I would say for all of you in the audience today is to be very careful of that. And be very careful of adapting to that pressure. Because while 996 will help in the short term, the reality is lasting design requires inspiration. If I look back and think who are the designers that impacted Figma the most, the ones that I think about are not the ones that worked the hardest. They're the ones that, it wasn't the ones that put in the most hours, it was the ones who truly had things outside of work that really defined who they were. Rasmus was one of our first designers. He made the Inter typeface, which is just, it's crazy how much that has spread today and how definitive it is to the Figma product. If you look at Figma in Arial, it looks kind of weird and wonky, but if we switch it back into Inter, suddenly that design feels right and it feels at home again. Another one of our designers is Martin Witchery, who just does some of the most beautiful work in one of the books that he released called Shift Happens. And the amount of polish and craft devoted to this was absolutely incredible. But he brings that inspiration, that craft back to Figma. And this is really because a great designer brings their outside life to work, and that is what causes that long-lasting impact and inspiration. So really, if you look at your hobbies, things like camping, they're going to make you a better designer. Things like pottery, they're going to make you a better designer. Hell, even video games will make you a better designer. I promise, it'll define who you are outside of work, and it'll bring that unique perspective to your team. So going back to this perspective is, if I work 2x the hours, I'll 2x my impact. The revised perspective here is if the only thing I do is work, it will cheapen that impact. And for us, we're meant to not have cheap design. We're meant to do things that inspire people. And this is because good designers are more than unidimensional. So don't forget to work on the part of yourself that gives you that unique perspective as well.